Hello and welcome back to Not Your Forte, a music education podcast for music ed students designed to help you survive and thrive throughout your undergrad. I'm Eric Tinkler, now going on my 5th year at Kansas State in music education. And as always, I'm joined by my fantastic co-host, Dr. Phillip Payne, the chair of the music ed division here at K-State. We are super excited. We are starting now season 3 of Not Your Forte, and I am so excited to be able to get back to talking to all of you guys, to sharing some really great things with our listeners. We're going to kick off. We have this 7-part series on leadership development called Habits of Successful Music Educators. It's going to be kind of influenced by Stephen Covey's 7 Habits, which if you have not read it, I highly recommend checking it out. Just search it on Amazon. You can easily get it. It's a great book, especially for these times. But before we get started with our wonderful guests that I'm sure you guys recognize, just a couple things to just kind of be on the lookout for. One, we're continuing to grow as a podcast, and we really appreciate all the help in sharing, subscribing, liking, doing all those things. You can find us just anywhere on YouTube, Spotify, Apple Podcasts, on and on. Please just make sure you follow us on our social media. That's how you can get the latest updates on what we're doing and just some additional content that we'd like to share. And if you want to check out, we have recently had an article published on the Kansas Music Review. If you just search that in Google, you can find it pretty easily, about kind of how we developed this idea and the kind of perspectives in which I've had going through this, and the learning experience I've gone throughout running a podcast. Once again, just thank you guys so much for joining. And let's go ahead. Let's introduce our guests, or reintroduce a good friend. Dr. Arau, would you like to say hi to the listeners?
Hi, everybody. This is Dr. Matthew Arau, and it's a real privilege and honor to be on Eric Tinkler's Not Your Forte podcast a second time. And I'm the chair of music education and associate director of bands at Lawrence University in Appleton, Wisconsin, and founder, CEO, and president of Upbeat Global. And you can check us out at www.upbeatglobal.com for a lot of resources, and I think will be a really positive influence during these times.
And going off on that, I highly recommend just checking out the content that Dr. Arau and everyone who he's been working with has been putting out. It's going to be really helpful as we go along with this series as well. It's just a lot of really great stuff about leadership, about growth mindset, about positivity, just some awesome things to help get through these kind of weird, tough times. So let's kick this off. We're gonna think about that first habit. And it's all about being proactive. So, but before we even talk about leadership, before we really dive into this conversation, what does proactive even mean?
Yeah, so Eric, it's a really great question. And I first read the 7 Habits of Highly Effective People when I was a middle school band director in about my 5th or 6th year of teaching. And reading that first habit about be proactive made such an impression on me. And what I learned is that being proactive is about taking responsibility for where you are in life, taking responsibility for your decisions and your choices, and recognizing that while your situation in life may not be where you want to be yet, it might not be an ideal situation, that you have the freedom to choose how you respond to your current conditions. And that can be really empowering when you discover that. You also start realizing that when you blame others and you point the finger at somebody else, it ends up coming around and pointing at yourself. And so it can be scary when you all of a sudden you realize, hey, I can't blame my conditions. I can't blame other people. I have to start owning it and taking responsibility for where I'm at and where I'm going.
I think one of the biggest things that stuck out to me is I went back and I was rereading, and I've got the 30th anniversary, so it's got some additional thoughts by Mr. Covey. And so one of the things that I found really interesting is when you go back and you read it, that fluid situation where you feel like sometimes, all right, I've made big progress in being proactive. But then you hear some of the quotes and you're like, oh, well, I said that here, or I say that here, and I'm jumping ahead a little bit maybe to the language, but this idea of being how fluid it is, that yes, we want to be proactive, but are there times where you might fall back into being reactive at times?
And I
Yeah,
think
absolutely.
I think a really important thing that Dr. Rao pointed out there. Sometimes it's scary to think about like what being proactive is, and like versus being what reactive is. And when you really sit down and think about how you are moving about the day, and thinking about, it's like, oh, I can blame this so easily, and I can blame it on this, and it's easy. It's really easy just to try to blame it on other things, instead of realizing and admitting to yourself, it's like, wait, that's something I've been doing. That's a cause of me. And that's a really scary and a really big step in realizing that shift from being a reactive person to being proactive. What are
Well, and I was going to say, I think the converse is also something that we want to bring up, though, is that talk a little bit about the freedom you feel once you realize that those choices are yours in being proactive and making those choices to be proactive.
Yeah, Eric, you want to take a stab at that?
Yeah, let's start with just kind of current events and stuff like that. Once back in March, like 3,000 years ago, it feels like, it was a very hard time to be proactive at first, when everything just shifted. Everything went to being online. I know at first with classes and everything, I was struggling. I was getting behind on things just because I was like, I'm like, I don't have the accountability here. It's not in person anymore. Online's difficult and stuff like that. But when I really sat down, and I was actually Dr. Gergel, who I had a conversation with. I reached out to her to have a conversation and be like, Dr. Gergel, I'm struggling with this right now, and this is me right now trying to take action and to be proactive, being like, okay, I realize I do need help, which that's an important thing to realize. Sometimes being proactive means asking for help, means asking someone to be an accountability partner, because self-accountability is a skill that you acquire over the course of time of just continually practicing it. And after doing that, I felt I was able to get more on top of my schoolwork, on top of other things I was having to do around the house. And just, it was a huge relief, actually, shifting back to being more proactive, of not falling behind, of getting my like homework assignments done like days ahead of time, instead of waiting until last minute and then having to stress over trying to get these done. So kind of that shift to being more proactive in terms of like, this is geared towards college students, of course. So it's just getting your homework done a little bit earlier, or not cram practicing for something. And it's a huge stress reliever and gets rid of a lot of that anxiety that we're already filled with as college students.
Eric, what you touched on reminds me of what Covey writes about how there's two circles. There's an inner circle and an outer circle. And we have to start by thinking about what we actually have influence over in our lives. And what we truly influence is ourselves, right? And our decisions and our attitude and how we approach life and respond to life. Then there's a bigger circle, which is our circle of concern, which I feel, speaking for myself, that I've had a lot of concern these past few months, and maybe my concern barometer was way up, particularly at the beginning of the COVID crisis. I had to step back and realize what I could actually control, and I couldn't control, the broader spectrum of things, of what was happening with the spread of the virus, but I could make decisions about my attitude living in the safety of my home and how I was going to approach life. I could be proactive about turning the news off and not looking at negative things that were coming up on my news feed and social media. I could make proactive choices to read uplifting growth mindset literature and books. I could listen to music that raised my spirits. I could play my instrument where I'd find joy. I could spend time reaching out to friends whom I hadn't connected with in years. I could find a way to turn a challenge into an opportunity. And I think that's important to remember, is that you focus on what you can make a difference in, And when you do that, you start to realize that your circle of influence actually starts to expand. And that's one of the great messages of Stephen Covey and the Be Proactive chapter, I think.
And I think for all of our future teachers, on looking at, how can we be proactive and even teaching music. And so we're not in our normal environments. And so being one of my mentors, he put together a group and they called it Banding Together. And it was, I think the last meeting we had 150 band directors that were all meeting together of how are we going to teach band virtually? What does this mean? What does it look like? And so it wasn't, well, because we've had our band rooms taken away, we can't teach band anymore. No, it was, all right, we have this dream of teaching music. How are we going to bring music to every student? And so that proactivity of being able to look at, what can we do to help our students? I think that's going to be one thing as teachers that our listeners are going through it as students, but they will also have those same experiences, I think, as teachers. And I think that's something to also think about is how would you react if? And so some of those questions I know will filter into our courses this fall of if you had to teach this virtually, what would it look like? And begin to really help our students even think more proactively, as well as I think you hit the nail on the head. It starts with the self and then it begins to grow from there.
Yeah, I love that you raised and made this relevant to teachers and music education students. I'm going to reflect on how we took this great challenge and actually found wonderful opportunity in this moment. I may have shared this with Eric before, but one of the challenges that happened for our music education class is that we were no longer going to have the opportunity to rehearse students in live and a living color in action, right? That was the big thing. And we used to, bring students together, they would rehearse, they would make comments and recreate that situation. And we would rehearse college students in my upper level class prior to student teaching. Well, we didn't have that opportunity anymore, but we ended up collaborating with middle school and high school students at international schools in Singapore, Malaysia, Hong Kong, and a public school in Long Island, New York. Those students would send us videos and audio recordings, and then my Lawrence University students were able to give audio feedback and or video feedback to the students and develop a relationship with actual middle school and high school students all around the world. And I'm confident that if we hadn't been thrown into this new situation, we wouldn't have discovered a way to find a new way to connect and make music around the world. So oftentimes a crisis leads to an opportunity if you can approach it with a proactive attitude. And that's one of the goals I think we all have to grow as individuals.
And I think that really reaches into the concept of taking initiative. Because the first and the biggest thing is taking that first step. And sometimes that's the hardest thing. But once you take that first step, it's a lot easier from there. You've already got that momentum going. You're already getting things rolling, getting things started. Can you talk a little bit more about the importance of, especially as college students right now in this world, about taking initiative on their educational experience right
now? Dr. Payne, you want to take that first?
Yeah, I think with taking initiative, I think the biggest thing for our students to do is to look where, number one, being aware of where they can grow. What are things that you can do and become a part of that are going to make you a better person, a better teacher, a better musician? And so it's always taking stock of what are your strengths, what are your weaknesses, where can you grow, where can you enhance, and then find those opportunities. And don't be afraid to put yourself out there, because there are going to be times when you fail. And that's fine. That's part of the learning process. But if you can put yourself out there and say, okay, this is going to make me a better teacher in the long run. This is going to make me a better musician. This is going to make me a better music educator. The more you put yourself out there, then the more that you're going to learn. And the beauty of it is you don't know what you don't know. So if you don't take that initiative to put yourself out there, then you're never going to find out what you don't know. And I think one perfect example would be this podcast in and of itself. When Eric first approached me about it, I was excited to do it. It was like, hey, well, this would be a great chance to get out there, to be able to share some thoughts. As lead advisor, there's always things that pop up, and I enjoy being able to offer those thoughts. But then as it began to take on a life of its own, then there were things that popped up that were like, ooh, well, we could talk about this. And so like through all of this, we started talking about, season 2 really ended with conducting from the podium. How do we become better educators from the podium rather than just thinking about stick technique and conducting? How do we become better music educators? Well, that opened up to a line of guests that just really opened the minds, hopefully, of our listeners. But then personally, you get to go back and you relive and you get to interact with all of these individuals nationwide that make you think, oh, well, I could do this a little bit differently. I can change this. And I think that happens on every level, whether we're a student, whether we're a teacher. We just have to realize that we're never stopping learning, and we constantly have to take that initiative to keep pushing ourselves forward in order to be the most effective version of ourselves, both for us, but as teachers, the most effective version of ourselves for our students.
Yeah, beautifully said. I think as a college student, in addition to all the, hit the nail on the head, Dr. Payne, I think as a college student, go beyond what it takes to get an A. Go beyond what it takes to get the grade. I think it's so easy to just do the required readings, show up for class. Well, do that. That's important. Make sure you do that. But I find that you will always get as much out of something as you put into it. And I was taught at a young age to, go backstage and meet the performers. So when I was 10 years old, I went backstage and met Carlos Montoya, flamenco guitarist. And I'm Spanish, and so it was like one of my heroes. And I was 10 years old, and I spoke in Spanish to him, and he started to cry. And that was when I realized, that it's a win-win. So go backstage, meet the performers, but also spend time with your professors outside of class. Ask them questions, invite them to coffee, milk the opportunity that you have with these people that are surrounding you at your college or university, and spend time with them. Ask them questions, be curious, see if is there anything you can do to help them in their research. Express gratitude. I tell you, very few people express gratitude. It's a rarity these days. I'll send emails out to lots of people expressing my gratitude. I'll get back like maybe 10% return on that. And it's just a sign that people take a lot of stuff for granted and they don't reach out and go the extra mile. But if you're one of those 10% that just reaches out, maybe you felt class went really well that day, or ensemble rehearsal went really well that day. I've had students write me and say, Dr. Rao, rehearsal was so great. I loved how you did this certain strategy. Keep doing that. And it's like, yeah, right on. And I remember those students. So be one of those people that goes the extra mile, be proactive, and you'll see that you're actually expanding your circle of influence when you do those little extra things, because you are building your network, you're building your mentoring system, you're strengthening those connections for beyond college when you're going to want to reach back and ask for support. Secondly, I should say, when you graduate college, stay in touch. Your education with these great professors and teachers around you shouldn't end, but many people think it does. They finish and they never stay in touch. I would suggest stay in touch, be connected, because the musical world is so small and we will all cross paths again. And I just want to mention that for me, Eric Tinkler. Hope you don't blush, but I think Eric is an example of a college student who is proactive, and he does take risks, and he is brave, and he's courageous, and he reaches out and just says, "Hey, would you like to be on my podcast?" And he goes for the moon. I mean, he contacts Tim Lotzenheiser and Paula Kreider and Charles Mangini, and is like, "Hey, would you guys be on my podcast?" And you think like, "Oh my gosh, that's like, asking, like David Bowie or something like to be on your podcast." So kudos, and you just never know until you try. And I think that's a great lesson about being proactive as well.
Yeah, and I loved your statement on gratitude, because it's one thing that, and I took this from my interactions with Scott Lang of doing thank you letters. So the week of Thanksgiving, then we go back, and I have our entire secondary methods course go in and modeled after his project, but we would thank you notes to people within the department, people that have ensured that our students have been successful. And I have them do a handwritten letter. It's not an email. It's all done handwritten, and then we deliver it the day before everybody leaves for Thanksgiving break. And the first year I did it, I mean, it took a lot of our faculty aback. They were just like, "Whoa, we've never seen anything quite like that." And then eventually it's become part of the culture, right? And so I've also seen an uptick on our students' engagement on, writing thank you letters, writing, and not just, typing, but handwritten letters to people that have been an influence for them or have impacted them in some way. And that's really developed a really strong culture. And I see that bearing out with our graduates. You see it on how they interact with their students and what they do on a daily basis. And so I just wanted to be able to piggyback on that, because I think that gratitude and that humbleness of understanding that we're standing on the shoulders of the people that went before us, I think that's really, really important, in being able to surround ourselves with people who have our backs and will be that support system for us, because it is, we know from the numbers, it's a rough profession those first couple of years of really making it through. We have to rely on each other and our network, and the broader that network is, the better that support system is as we go through and we continue to teach in the classroom.
To give my 2 cents on some things that have been said. First of all, just Dr. Rao and Dr. Payne, thank you so much for kind words. I'm really just hoping that this is able to help out some of my peers and other people. And honestly, it's a little selfish doing this sometimes, because I have the opportunity to learn so much through just doing it. Even if there's just 1 or 2 listeners or whatever, I am learning so much from this experience, and I'm very grateful for that. With what Dr. Arau is talking about reaching for the stars, of just sending an email, sending a message or whatever, I would tell that's my biggest piece of advice I would say to anyone entering into college, even people in high school or younger right now. Don't be afraid to reach out to the people who you look up to in your profession, and to introduce yourself, say some piece of gratitude for how they've influenced you, because you really never know what a small connection will do for you. I've every time after I attend a conference, whatever it may be, I will make sure to go up front, say thank you, and introduce myself, say thank you to the speaker, and just kind of give just some nice words and stuff, and just showing true gratitude for allowing me to learn from them. Because I mean, that's the real gift of what everything is the gift of learning right now, especially in a world to where there's just so much right now going on. And I think we can all do with continuing to be learners, whatever age we are, whether we're 5 years old or 50 years old. You can always continue to learn. And just a final note on the gratitude thing. I read this, there's this article, I'll try to find it and share it on our Facebook page but being like showing gratitude, writing thank you letters, and doing these things is like, it's literally good for your brain. Like it helps. I think, Dr. Rao, you're a little bit more learned on how the brain works, but it helps increase dopamine production if I'm thinking correctly, and just generally helps you lifts your spirit. So I think just whatever you're saying about taking initiative, that means showing gratitude, that means reaching out to people, and that means not being afraid to ask for help. And that there's kind of my 2 cents on that.
That's great. That's great.
Going forward, there's one thing I really want to touch on, the word responsibility. In the book, and I'm sure people have heard this before, but responsibility is really just a compound word of responsibility. Can either of you take a stab or what that means to you or to us as music educators?
I'll jump in here and refer to a quote by Viktor Frankl, the psychologist and Holocaust survivor who wrote a seminal work called Man's Search for Meaning. And in that work, he shares something that's really valuable for us to reflect on, which is that between stimulus and our response, there's a space. And it's in that space where we have the ability to choose our response. And that is so important. We tend to develop habits of reaction, and they begin from a very early age. And they can be taught to us by how we're parented and how our peer group acts. And we get positive and negative reinforcement based on our particular reaction. We tend to react the same way that the people around us react, and it's a learned response. But you can change your habit of reaction. Maybe something continually happens and it really irritates you. Well, that thing's not going to change. The only thing that can change is yourself and your own choice of how you choose to respond to it. And so what it is, we can choose a new habit. Well, how do you create a new habit? It takes effort, intention, and deliberate practice to develop a new habit to change our response. And there are certain things we can do to help us in that moment. Imagine that you listen to something on the news or somebody's voice just sends you off, and you know that every time you hear that, you have a negative response to it. Well, that doesn't do you any good. It doesn't allow you to be the best version of yourself. So employ a new strategy. Maybe take a deep breath for just a moment. Just create your own space. A deep breath through your nose and out your mouth. Just pause. Step back. Try to step outside of your body and just be aware. Oh, this is what happens to me every time. I'm going to choose a different response. I'm going to focus on something else. I'm going to focus on gratitude. I'm going to focus on joy. I'm going to try to find the goodness in the person who's irritating me and recognize that in the end, we all are essentially human with the same needs. We all need care and compassion in our lives, and perhaps we can be more compassionate towards others rather than irritated. But again, it is a choice. It begins here. It begins within. And we're so used to blaming everything on our external life and saying it's because of them that I'm this way, when really just breathe and choose your response. And that idea has become so important to me as I've developed my own personal practice of mindfulness and meditation and trying to be aware in the moment. It's not always easy. It's not easy. It's not easy. And I fail over and over and over again. But it begins with being self-aware and recognizing, yes, I do have a choice.
And I would add on to that as well, because I think that's spot on, is this idea of hearing versus listening. A lot of times our response, whether it's in a conversation or whether it's in, maybe you're having a discussion, you go directly to what's on the top of your mind. And so I think letting it simmer, and I like the idea of taking a breath, but really take in what the other person is saying, listen to it, analyze it, and be able to take just a moment and then respond. And whether that's through whether it's through conversation, whether it's through action, being able to process what you're hearing. I'm going to add a layer in on empathy. Be able to, whenever you're analyzing, whenever you're thinking about it, be sure that you're reflecting on where it's coming from, how it's being delivered. All of those items are really important for you being able to choose. And I think there's a section later on too, where they talk about this freedom of choice. You have the choice of how you're going to respond. And so you take all of this information in, but you have to listen. It can't be a hear and react. It has to be, you take in, you really think about it, and then you respond. And I think, a lot of times you have to, in the end, you're responsible for yourself. You're responsible for your reactions. You're responsible for how you connect with others and how you converse, how you communicate. And so really focusing on how you listen, how you communicate, and how you convey that to others, I think is going to be really important as well. So I would say listening and empathy are really, really huge parts of that equation as you're making the choice of how to respond to various stimuli.
And I think that's really important to take that breath, to think and to have that empathy and really decide on how you're going to respond. Oftentimes, especially in today's environment, just across the world, and anything is, and I would say it's very present in just public discourse or in social media. You see this stuff all the time. People just say the first thing that pops on their mind, and that's whatever they've just been conditioned to believe through how they've grown up and the people they've been around. And I think oftentimes, if we were able to just sit and kind of think about it a little bit and have that empathy and try to understand where these differing viewpoints are coming from, that would just help us out as a society as a whole. There's a lot of things going on in this world right now, in this country right now, where people aren't having this response ability. They're just going off stimulus to reaction, and they're not exercising the wonderful trait of humanity that is our self-awareness, and for us to relate to people. So I think just both this concepts of taking initiative and responsibility as we go into this new school year, especially, there's going to be a lot of people who are very confused, unsure. There's going to be people wearing masks. There's going to be people not wearing masks. It's going to be all sorts of different things. It's just having understanding, having empathy, and just trying to not instantly just snap at whatever first comes to your head, but to take that breath and to think about it.
And a little simple action, you brought up social media. Even if you do get pulled into the comments section, which I highly suggest not doing, it's vital to not hit send and not hit tweet and not hit, however, until you've actually read what you've actually responded. I have responded to some posts for various reasons, but it's not instantaneous. It's something where I might scroll through and I'm like, well, wait a second. What if this person needs to hear something? And so I message it in such a way that it's not reactionary. So you're thinking about it. And if it's weighing on you and you want to be able to send it out there, don't hit send and tweet right away. Don't be reactionary in that. If you want to open up discourse, number one, we have to understand that social media is not the best platform for effective public discourse. It might start a conversation, but it's never really the most effective. But if you feel like you want to put something out there, if you want people to understand how you're feeling or communicate that, be sure you read it before you hit, because once you hit it, once you hit send, once you hit tweet, it's out there for everybody to see. And so you have to be really aware of that. And that's part of making that decision. That's that stimulus response, that moment that you get to choose. This is it. Yes, this is how I want to react, or this is what I want to say, versus, okay, I put that down, but that's not going to convey what I really feel, and you delete it before it even gets out there. So I wanted to bring that up as well.
I think social media is personally good for 3 different things. 1, sports. Fastest way to get sports updates. 2, it's great to just share things with your family, like pictures and stuff of what's going on, because it's always good to update the family. And 3, following Not Your Forte. That's the most recently added one.
Yes.
But that's all you need. That's all you need it for.
That was the smoothest plug in the history of podcasting. Really well done, Mr.
Oh,
Tinkler.
yeah. Don't worry. Let's continue to move forward and kind of talk about, like, what is a proactive leader going to look like right now? When thinking about college students, and we've touched on this a bit, but going into this new semester, what do you think we should do in order to both prepare for the semester, and as we enter in the semester, what should we do to be proactive?
Well, I think a couple traits are going to be really important going into the fall, and one of them is your attitude about how you approach it, and also entering with this idea that it's okay to be flexible and adaptable, that it could change. It could change on a dime, right? We could start in person and then 3 weeks in be like, oh, we're not doing that, and go into quarantine or go back home. There's going to be a lot of shifting, a lot of unknowns, and if we're prepared for that already, it's like a skier who's visualizing the slopes that are going to be going down. They anticipate the moguls. They know there's going to be some dips in the road, or not dips in the road, but dips in the hill and in the mountain, or trees in the way. And they actually see all the possible pitfalls before it happens. And then when they do encounter them, they're already ready. They're like, oh yeah, I knew this was going to happen. I knew it could happen. And therefore they're much more prepared mentally for it. And then the other part is just your attitude that you approach it with, which is, hey, we're all in this together. We're trying to figure this out. Everybody's doing the best they can with the information that they're given. And if you approach it that way, you're ready to go. If all of a sudden it turns out, hey, we can only have 15 students in the rehearsal hall at a time, we're going to shift everything and, do a chamber piece, and you're just ready to go. Or maybe it's decided, we can only do octets. Okay, let's do it. Let's make these the best darn octets we've ever performed in. And embracing these new situations as an opportunity, because how we respond to this crisis defines us as individuals. I feel every generation has had their moment in history, and how they've chosen to respond defines them as we look back on the different generations. We didn't know that World War II was going to happen, or Vietnam was going to happen, or 9/11 was going to happen. How we chose to respond to those crises has defined us. How you decide to respond in terms of your attitude to this crisis that we find ourselves in now, it defines you. And I think it does stem from your values and your character and your choice. You can either be reactive and blame everybody else, or you can be proactive and embrace the situation and learn as much as you can and be part of the solution rather than part of the problem.
Absolutely. I think the flexibility, I think, and showing that sense of understanding that, a lot of our professors and our teachers, and I see this even at the public school level too, it was such a shift from in-person to online that most of our teachers have not been trained to teach online. That's a different animal altogether. And so having that flexibility of understanding and empathizing with our teachers that, yes, we understand that you as students are going from in-person to online, and you paid for in-person classes and we're moving them to online. It's the same way for your professors, and that they're having to shift gears just as much on trying to figure out, how do we make this accessible? How do we still get, comparable, I'm not going to say the same content, because you can't cover the same amount of content in such a short amount of time. And so understanding that it's going to look different, but take advantage of this as a young teacher. And so, and Eric knows this, I talk to all of our students. I tell them, you all are teachers. After that very first semester that we have you in Intro to Music Ed, all of you are teachers from here on out. I want you looking at how your teachers sequence their instruction, how they give assessments, what kinds of tests do they use, what's most effective for your learning style, what were some other effective teaching traits that you saw. It's going to be the exact same thing here. Ask yourselves, what is music? What if we really get down to it, what is it that we teach? And those that are in my secondary methods course this fall, we're going to be talking about our philosophy of music education. And this is going to be one of the primary questions is, what is it that we teach? And then how do we best teach that in multiple environments? And what does that look like to teach music online? What is it that we can teach online that we weren't able to teach in person? And how do we begin to fuse those two areas and understand that while it might not work really well with our learning style, there's a lot for us to take from this experience to make ourselves better music teachers moving forward, whether that's after graduation this spring and I'm going into the classroom this fall. How is that going to make me a better first year teacher? And so everything that we do, every experience we have, and I even talk about this with our students as we go through a class that may not be what we would say our favorite class, you're still going to learn something from that class. It might be learning a teaching technique. It might be learning something maybe it's something what not to do, but you're learning something. You're learning something that's going to make you a better teacher. You're putting another arrow into your quiver. So what are we going to take from this experience? And that's how we become proactive leaders through starting back up in the fall.
And I think it was Frank Troika who mentioned this. When we're going to be looking for jobs for employment, this is something that we can share our experience with and talk about of how we had to be flexible. Because I think you guys probably attest, but being a teacher, you need to be flexible. You need to be able to deal with any situation that pops up. And I think depending on how we're choosing to respond to these situations, if we're going to take this opportunity to learn about how to be flexible, how to adjust, how to work all these online different things, and just share that experience of like, I was able to adjust with this and learn even more just because the way I was able to adjust. It'll be a unique thing as we're going through and looking for jobs for the older students and everything. Be like, yeah, I had to adjust pretty quickly on the fly with how the things, and just be open about it. Be open about the experience. There's some parts that won't be the same, but this is still a unique opportunity. And I try to use that word opportunity when it comes to things, even if I'm not super excited about it all the times. If I continue to use the word opportunity and it has that positive connotation with it, this is an opportunity to continue to learn. As Dr. Arau calls his alarm clock, his opportunity clock. These difficult situations are opportunities to learn and to grow and just to make that choice.
And I think that might be a challenge for our listeners, Eric, of, once the semester starts, set up a time during office hours of a couple of your professors and just ask them, how has this process been for you? What have been the struggles? What have been the successes? What has worked for you? And because number one, it's going to be really, for lack of a better term, therapeutic for those professors to be able to talk about their experiences, but it's also going to help our listeners on how to best navigate moving forward as future teachers.
Very well thought. So kind of going towards wrapping up here, just one final question and a question we're going to save for last for most of these episodes. Just Dr. Arau, in kind of your own words, can you define what a leader is, or what does a leader look like, and just kind of go into why?
Yeah, I define leadership as inspiring and encouraging others to achieve their full potential. And for me, leadership begins within, right? Our attitudes. I like this idea that you can either be a thermometer and just report the weather, or you can be a thermostat and create the weather that you want it to be. And so I think leadership begins from within, but it's really about how we serve others. And I think we can, in our environment, lift others up and elevate them by showing them that you value them. And oftentimes a leader finds value in others before that person recognizes it in themselves. And I think that's a really important part of leadership today, is to highlight and spotlight the beauty and the goodness in others, and to look for the goodness in others. And leadership is also founded on character and values, and not just going with the whim of the day, but it's about having a foundation of character and values, but yet being flexible and adaptable to be willing to look within if you recognize that maybe your values maybe aren't maybe you could learn. If you're always open to learning and changing, I think that's a good thing about a leader, admitting that you're wrong and willing to learn and grow. And I think that's actually a position that many of us find ourselves in today. And being a teacher, I believe that we're lifelong learners. I also believe that leaders are learners, which is why I think your podcast is awesome, because it's about continual growth for all of us.
Thank you. Just really, really well put. Dr. Arau, thank you so much for coming back onto the podcast. It's always a pleasure to have the opportunity to chat with you, to learn from you, and I hope our listeners feel the same way. Is there? You mentioned earlier Upbeat Global, your new website and everything. Is there anything else that you'd like to talk about or expand upon that?
Sure. I'm excited in terms of growth mindset to have launched my Upbeat virtual leadership academy for high school student leaders and drum majors. And that'll be July 27th through the 30th. And just really excited to embrace the opportunity to reach people all over the country. And that's one of the things we've found, is that online learning has allowed us to increase access to events that would have required people to fly there, to spend a lot of money, and now you can reach many people all at once. And that's a really huge positive thing. And we're learning that even if when we do return to in-person teaching, we're probably going to use a lot of the strategies that we used in online, because some things we realized we could reach people even more effectively in this online setting. So I love that about our profession, that we're continually growing and getting better. But if you'd like to have resources and inspirational thoughts about how through videos, podcasts, articles, and the whole gamut, my goal, my vision is to spread positivity through leadership and music. And come on board and join the movement, because I think the world needs a dose of positivity in a really positive way to lift us all up.
Well put. Well put.
Well, we'd like. Oh, go ahead, Eric.
That's Dr. Payne. You can go ahead. Before you do that, actually, I just want a quick note and a quick thank you to the composer of our intro music. I don't mention his name enough, but he's an awesome friend. He's here at K-State. He's a composition major, Sam Allison. Just thank you so much. I hope you guys enjoyed the intro music as well as much as I do. It's fun. But Dr. Payne, you can go ahead and take us on out.
Absolutely. Thank you again, Dr. Arau, for joining us on this kickoff for season 3 of Not Your Forte podcast. To all of our listeners, be sure that you're sharing as much as possible. Share us on all social media platforms, Facebook, Twitter, Instagram. Also, check us out on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, YouTube. Anywhere that you can find podcasts, you will be able to find Not Your Forte podcast. Get it out there, share us, rate us 5 stars so that we're easier to find. And let's just keep on getting more and more subscribers so we can begin to impact change even further throughout our profession and all of those people that are going to be future teachers, because the impact is immeasurable. And we look forward to episode 2. Looking forward, we're going to be having Dr. Charles Mangini. I'm President Emeritus of Vandercook College, and also one of the co-authors of Essential Elements. So we're really excited to have him on for episode 2. Again, thank you to Dr. Arau for starting our season off fantastically, and in really lots of great momentum moving forward, talking about music educators as leaders in the classroom. Thanks again, and we'll see everyone next time.
Bye-bye.